generational wealth is the current term that's being bandied about, but a term I'd like to use is net worth. And the first thing I want to do is just to recite a statistic about in New Jersey, whites, Latinos, and blacks. The median net worth of whites in New Jersey is $300,000. What that means is 50% of white folks in New Jersey have more than $309,000 in net worth, and 50% have less. For Latinos, the median net worth is $7,020, which means that 50% have more than $7,020 and 50% have less. For blacks, the median net worth is $5,900, which means that 50% have more than that and 50% have less. Net worth is what you own minus what you owe. So what we want to do going forward is to make sure that our people have considerably more than $5,900 net worth. So where do we start? We could either start at the beginning or at the end, and I'm going to start at the end. That is with the estate. What do you do in terms of planning for your estate? And of course, the estate is what you have, what you own and control. It consists of money, real property, that's real estate, personal assets, stocks, bonds, securities, savings plans, 401k, 403b, etc., and business assets if you have them. What's an estate plan? Next slide, please. It's a plan to cover the lifetime needs of the person doing the individual plan and his or her loved ones. And it includes providing for the individual's health care, managing one's personal affairs, leaving a legacy. That's this whole idea of generational wealth, and reducing and managing federal and estate taxes, which is not as big an issue in today's world because the politicians have increased the amount of an estate that's exempt from those taxes up to $11.5 million, which is not a number that we're going to be talking about today. The next slide, please. How do you establish an estate plan? Well, these items are items that I would suggest that you write down and become familiar with, because they're very important components of any estate plan. The last will and testament, a living will, power of attorney, and trust. The last will and testament is probably the document that most people are familiar with or have heard about. That's where you lay out what you would like to have happen to things that you own or to your minor children once you have passed. It talks about who's going to handle your affairs, and if you have minor children, who you would like to have them placed in custody with, and how you would like to have your resources distributed to them. A living will, also called a healthcare directive, is something that we all need to have, particularly in the times that we find ourselves in today with the pandemic, etc. And it talks about who you would want to make healthcare decisions for you in the event that you are unable to make them for yourself. The case that brought this to light, that some of you may remember, is the Terry Shriver case, where there was a lady that was in a coma and for like over 20 years, I believe, and there was a big debate between the husband and the family as to whether or not the she should be taken off of life support. And what you want to do with a living will is to identify how you would want your body to be handled in the event that you're not able to make those decisions for yourself. And you would name a healthcare representative or representatives to make those types of decisions for you in the case that you cannot make them for yourself. The power of attorney, on the other hand, is a document that is used to assign someone to handle your business affairs in the event that you're not able to do that for yourself. And you would name an individual or individuals who would handle your business affairs. And of course, you need to make very sure that when you do these things with all of these documents, that the person that you identify to handle your affairs is a business-minded person or a responsible individual that's going to do what you want that individual to do in your stead. And then the trust, a trust is an instrument that you can either create while you're living, or it can be a part of your will, which is created upon your death. And it is the document that you can use to remove assets from your estate, or if you have minor children, you can identify who would be handling the affairs for your children in the event that you are no longer with us. Some additional components that make up an estate plan, next slide, please, are how you title property. For example, when I talked about the median net worth of the various groups, the main asset that most people have is a house. And it's very important, if you do have a house, how it's titled. If you are a husband and wife and you buy the house together, well, then it's joint tenants with rights of survivorship, or tenants by the entirety. Tenants by the entirety is the legal term for the husband and wife when they buy the house together. And in both cases, what happens when one individual passes is that the property automatically goes to the survivor. And that can be the case if you have a bank account or a investment account where you have it labeled as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. When the first person passes, the second person would receive the whatever the asset is. And another important designation are beneficiary designations, which you usually have when you have a financial account, such as a brokerage account, or if you have IRA or 401k plans, and also insurance policies. It's very important in all of those cases that when you identify a beneficiary, that you also have a contingent beneficiary in case the individual that you named as the beneficiary predeceases you. The next slide, please. So again, I talked about the function of the last will and testament. Let me tell you what happens if you don't have a will. And I will give you an example. When you don't have a will, basically whatever you have passes through the laws of intestate succession, which means that the state is going to determine what happens to your resources. Unfortunately, I had a case recently where the husband and wife died from COVID within 2 weeks of each other, and they did not have a will, but they did have assets, and they also had a child who was an adult. The problem was that the adult child lived out of state, and when you die without a will, someone has to step up to say that they want to administer the estate. It's best if it is a family member, but it can be anyone who has an interest in the estate. That could even be a creditor. In this case, the individual that clearly had an interest in the estate was the daughter. She was out of state, and if you don't have a will, the person who steps up to try to be the administrator of the estate has to get bonded. And you can't get bonded if you have bad credit. Unfortunately, the person who tried to step up to be the administrator didn't have good credit and therefore could not be bonded and consequently could not administer the estate. And in that case, it was quite problematic. And that person basically had to retain me to help with that situation, which I did. If you have a will, when you name the executor or the executrix, who are the equivalent of an administrator when you're talking about an intestate matter, that person, if you name them in the will, does not have to present a bond, and therefore can simply take the document to the probate office, to the surrogate's office, have it probated so that they can then get the letters that are required, letters testamentary, so that they can handle the estate. In the case of the person that doesn't have a will, the administrator still has to go to the surrogate court to get what's called letters of administration. In both cases, letters testamentary and letters of administration allow the individual that gets the documents to handle the estate. And you need to have those letters so that you can communicate with creditors and with financial institutions that hold the individual's assets, so that they will allow you to gather the assets, and gather the bills, and pay the bills, and then whatever is left gets distributed to the heirs as indicated in a will. And if there is no will, then the assets get the remaining assets, i.e. the net worth, gets distributed according to the laws of the state, which you usually don't want that to be the case. All right. Now, again, keep in mind what I said at the beginning, that the average net worth for Blacks in New Jersey is $5,000. So there's really not a lot to distribute to anyone. And the main reason for that is that the average person is not, the average Black person is not a homeowner. Same thing with the average Latino is not a homeowner. And the average white in New Jersey is a homeowner. And as you have heard from some of the previous presenters. Now all of this has to do with the way that that we have been treated over the years. That's true. But that doesn't mean that it has to continue to be the case. So when we talk about probate assets, the probate assets are the things that you have to go to the surrogate court in order to get the letters testamentary to administer. Not everything that an individual owns at the time of death are probate assets. For example, anything that has a beneficiary associated with it will pass directly to the beneficiary. So if you have a savings account, if you have a brokerage account, you have a 401k or an IRA, and you have named a beneficiary, when you pass, what you have goes directly to that individual. However, if you have not named a contingent beneficiary, and that person predeceases you, when you pass, it goes to your estate. And then what's in the estate, if you haven't specifically said what happens to it, it falls into a category called your residuary estate, and it gets distributed according to the catch-all clause that you have in your will. If you don't have a will, then it becomes more problematic, and it gets distributed according to the laws of the state of New Jersey, which is really not what you want to have happen. So in all cases, it's preferable that you do have a written document stating what you would like to have happen with the things that you own, or with the individuals that are minors that you are responsible for. So probate assets are assets that are only in your name. So if you have a bank account that's only in your name, a brokerage account that's only in your name, or any of those other financial documents that are only in your name, or even a house that's only in your name. Okay, and you then have to get the letters testamentary and dispense with those things according to the will. And if there is no will, again, according to the laws of the state of New Jersey. Next slide, please. So we talked already about what's the function of a living will. And again, it identifies, you identify who the individual or individuals are that you want to take care, make the healthcare decisions for you in the event that you're not able to make them for yourself, and how you would like your end of life to be addressed. Whether you would like, for example, to be resuscitated in the event that you stop breathing, if you would like to have a feeding tube, if you'd like to have various types of medications to relieve pain, and if you want to donate any of your organs. Now, and then again, the power of attorney is, as mentioned earlier, used for to identify an individual or individuals to take care of your business affairs. And I mean all of your business affairs too. It's whatever you would have done on your own. If you have a comprehensive power of attorney, it will allow the individual that you identify to handle your business for you. Again, it's very important that that individual be someone that you know and trust explicitly, because once you give them the power of attorney, if it is a durable power of attorney, they can do whatever you would have been able to do in the event that you're not able to do it for yourself. Now, there are different types of powers of attorney. There can be a limited power of attorney where you specifically state that the person can only do certain things. And there can be a springing power of attorney that only comes into effect when you are incapacitated. But the durable power of attorney is effective as soon as you execute it and give it to the individual that you have designated. And again, if that individual is not available or unable or unwilling to exercise those powers, it's good to have a second person named as an alternate. The next slide, please. Well, we talked about, the function of title property, and just again, to refresh your recollection on that, it has to do with if you only own the property solely in your name, well, then you must have state what you want to have happen with it in a will. If it's in your name and someone else's name is joint tenants with rights of survivorship, it will pass directly to the person that's named as the survivor, of course, as long as they survive you. Let's see. The next slide, please, because we talked about the joint tenants and tenants of its entirety. Now, about trust, you can use a trust, and again, for our purposes, to reduce estate taxes. Now that the estate exemption is $11.5 million, that's usually not going to be an issue. But to provide for the management of assets of minors, in the event that you have children, and unfortunately you passed before they reach the age of majority, well, then you would want to have a testamentary trust identified in your will that identifies who a trustee would be to handle any resources that you are able to pass on to your children, and who the guardian would be. That would be the children would be placed in their charge, and what the trustee and the guardian would be able to do with regards to the minor children. Also, you can use the trust to manage assets for incapacitated persons. Sometimes you may have an incapacitated minor who is getting state aid, and if you have considerable assets that would be passed to the minor child upon your demise, that would prohibit them from getting the state aid, and you can have those assets put into a trust, a specific kind of trust that would continue to allow the minor child to receive the state aid. And likewise, if it's the adult who is trying to qualify for Medicaid, because you can't have more than $2,000 in assets in order to be eligible for Medicaid, you can put assets into an irrevocable trust. Once you put the assets into that type of trust, you no longer have any control over them, and so they're no longer considered part of your estate. But that would allow you to qualify for Medicaid. Now, this has been around for many a day, but unfortunately, because people were abusing it, the requirement now is that if you want to remove assets from your estate, you have to do so 5 years before you anticipate having to go on state aid, or, for example, having to go into a nursing home. And if you don't do that, then so, for example, if you put the assets in someone else's name within 5 years of going into a nursing home, the nursing home can claw back the asset. So when you're trying to plan for what you might need to do because of failing health, etc., it's important to do that well ahead of time. Otherwise, what you are trying to do in terms of shielding the assets will not be possible. So, in summary, next slide, please. These are some of the items that one should be thinking about when you're doing estate planning. The last will and testament, which basically says who the individual is that you want to administer your estate after you're gone. That person would then gather all of the assets, gather all of the debts. Hopefully there are more assets than debts, pay off the debts, and then distribute the remaining assets to your beneficiaries as you have identified in the will. The living will, which you would have identified someone who would be making healthcare decisions for you in the event that you're not able to make them for yourself. A power of attorney, which would allow an individual to make business decisions for you in the event that you're not able to make those for yourself. That would be to pay your bills and taxes and all those kinds of things. And then there's the trust that we mentioned earlier, how you title your properties, which is very important. One example of what could be a potential problem is if you have, say, considerable amounts of money in either bank accounts or brokerage accounts, and you have identified joint tenants with rights of survivorship, so that those assets go directly to the individual who is your survivor. But in your will, you actually state that you would like to have the resources, the monies, go to other individuals, that becomes a real big problem, because the money that is in these joint counsel rights of survivorship will go directly to the individual that is the survivor and will not be available for the other individuals you may have named in your will to get what are called non-probate assets. Again, if you have the assets and they have joint tenants with rights of survivorship, they're not probate assets. And that sometimes is a big issue, because the individual who prepares, the individual who tells the attorney to make the will does not tell the attorney how the assets are titled, and may identify a non-probate asset as the account that has monies in it that the testator wants to go to other people. And then it doesn't happen, because the person that's the joint tenant will get the money. So these things get to be a little more technical and require further conversation. But could you go to the last slide, please? Oh, no, not that, the one before that. So what we've been talking about is what you do with an estate. But I started off by saying that, hey, the average Black family in New Jersey has $5,000. Well, what can you do to make sure that you have considerably more than that? Well, that's where financial planning comes in. And that's what Betty Jarvis is going to speak to that in a minute. But there's some basic guidelines that I want to mention. When you talk about financial planning, there basically are 4 things that one needs to consider. One is, well, how can you build an estate? Well, you're going to build an estate from whatever it is that you do to generate resources. So for most of us, that's a job. All right. And so the main thing about the job, or the main individual, is you. And so you need to be able to protect your income generating ability. And then you need to have discretionary income. It's the discretionary income that you will then use to put the money to work for you, so that it can grow into a meaningful estate. So you need to understand what growth is all about of your resources, and how to do that in a safe way. And once your resources start to grow, you want to also think about how to do it in a tax smart or tax advantage way. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Betty, who can explain a little bit more about it from the financial planning perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. Bob has done a terrific job of talking about the reasons one needs to have an estate plan. But in order to have an estate plan, there are steps you have to take to generate the income that's going to afford you to fund that estate plan. So what I'd like to really talk about in just a couple of questions that might arise is how do you accumulate wealth, and also how do you protect that wealth? Because protection is going to be the foundation of any type of planning that you do. You go out, you have a car, you get auto insurance for your car, you get homeowners insurance, but what are you doing to protect your income in the event of a disability, or what are you doing to protect your income in case there is a untimely death? So Bob has some questions that he's going to pose to me, and I will do my best to answer those and to give you some solid advice. Bob?
Well, the first thing is that, as I mentioned, most of us are going to accumulate whatever we're going to accumulate based upon our ability to work. There are various financial instruments that are used to protect our income generating ability. And could you speak to a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, as Bob mentioned previously, our income is our greatest source of accumulating our wealth. And when we accumulate this income, we need to develop a strategy where the first person you take care of is yourself. You have to pay yourself first. And that gets you started on the wealth accumulation pathway. The second thing that you do is you identify, you have a budget, that budget helps you to understand what your cash flow is. And then Bob also mentioned discretionary income. Well, once you determine your budget and your cash flow, you take the things that are essential, your mortgage, your car payments, things like that, those are your necessary expenses. And then you have the discretionary portion. It is from the discretionary portion of your income that you can fund your various vehicles that will help you accumulate wealth.
What kind of vehicles, Betty? What can one do to put their money to work for them?
Well, they can invest in the stock market. That's one way, but understand that there's an element of risk that's involved with that. But that is usually the way that most people will approach wealth accumulation. But you can also have a rental property, or you can have a business that you create and that you can earn passive income from, as well as what you earn on your job. But the key is to put money away. And when we're working with our clients, what we generally like to say is, again, paying yourself first, identify 15 to 20% of your gross income that you can start putting away and having it work for you. Now, what vehicles can you use? You're working, if you have a position that offers benefits such as a 401k, certainly take advantage of that, especially if it has a match. But you also need to, in doing those things, make sure you have an emergency fund as well, because the last thing we would want you to do is to have to pull money out of your retirement to take care of the emergencies that might come your way, needing a roof, or let's just go back to the last few days, the impact that Ida had. If you have an emergency fund, that would help you to address some of that. So having an emergency fund is one of the buckets you need to fund. You need to fund your savings, your retirement. If you have goals such as sending your kids to college, you need to fund those buckets. But the most important thing is to save. And the earlier you start saving, then you're going to have the opportunity to take advantage of compounded interest. And compounded interest, it's magical to many, because what happens, you start your plan with X number of dollars, and you're earning a certain percentage on that. Well, that money gets added to the bucket, and then the following year, when they do the interest again, it's not on what your original investment was, it's what that investment plus the interest you earned the previous year. So if you do that consistently, it will help you to accumulate wealth. And that's one of the ways that you can do that. And there are various buckets to put in. You have a pre-tax bucket, which is where your 401k is going to come in. You have your after-tax bucket, and that's things that you do after the money is taken out for taxes. And then, of course, the protection piece, again, is most likely the one area, which, if I might say this gently, that we are a little bit, we don't always understand the importance of that protection piece. And when I say that, what I simply mean is that from a perspective of being able to pass on wealth, one of the best vehicles to do that is with life insurance. And if you have the right type of life insurance that's going to be available when you need it most, that's what's going to allow you to pass wealth on to your family. And the key for our audience is to recognize and work with a professional to understand the different types of insurance. So
what are the two main types, Betty? What are the two main types of insurance?
the two main types are permanent and term. And permanent provides you with the death benefit for the extent of your life as long as your premiums are paid. Term insurance, on the other hand, is for a specified period of time. And it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 30 years. And at the end of that time frame, you can keep that insurance, but it becomes very, very costly. Whereas if you have permanent insurance, that gives you level premiums for your lifetime as long as your premiums are paid, and provides you with a benefit for your family.
Well, Betty, why shouldn't I just, take my money and put it in the bank?
Generally, the money that you place in the bank has taxable consequences because it's not growing tax deferred or tax free. And so that's one of the reasons why you would not want to just have your money in the bank. When you have the right type of insurance plan, that money generally grows tax deferred and gets distributed tax free. And that's a huge benefit in terms of being able to pass wealth.
But what about the interest that you get in your bank account?
Your interest that you get in the bank account, again, let me just say it this way. I am not a tax advisor, nor am I supposed to give tax advice.
Well, okay, I'll say it. The banks don't really give you much in terms of an interest on your money. And one of the things, see, I can say these things because I'm not a financial professional. I'm just going to give you the basic, real deal. When we talk about making your money work for you, there is a very simple rule that if you learn and understand this rule, it's the most valuable piece of information that you can take away from this conversation we're having this afternoon. It's called the Rule of 72. Mm-hmm. You can Google it, but I'm going to tell you what it means. But then you'll need to do your research to understand it. What the Rule of 72 says is that whatever interest you earn on a particular vehicle that you are putting your money into, i.e. an investment vehicle, if you divide that into the number 72, that's how long it would take for whatever money you put into that vehicle to double. For example, if you took $100 and put it into a vehicle that was earning 4% return a year, if you divide 4 into 72, that's 18 years. Mm-hmm. And so your $100 would turn into $200 in 18 years. Now, I bet everybody has at least one credit card. And you don't even want to tell me what the interest rate is that you are paying on the credit card, but it's double digit, most likely. Hmm. And the financial institution that gave you the credit card is earning that double digit interest rate on you. Mm-hmm. There's hardly anywhere that you can invest your money to get a double digit return. Because the other part of the Rule of 72 is that as you seek to get a higher interest rate on your investment, the risk of losing your money increases. Exponentially. All right. And so when you talk with a financial professional like Betty, one of the things that she's going to ask you is, what is your risk tolerance? And the regular person is going to say, what are you talking about? and then the typical example is, well, do you go to the casinos and do you like to gamble? Well, No, I don't want to gamble. Are you comfortable losing money? Well, no, I'm not comfortable. Well, and so then you have to figure out what your risk tolerance is. But this rule of 72 is the key to how you go from not having anything. I mean, not having anything to having more than $5,000 in net worth. And the question is, how do you make it work for you in a manner that you're comfortable with? And that's why you would talk to someone like Betty. All right. But I also, before I forget, I want to give you another Google reference to this is an individual who's a real person, and he's a regular guy, and you can Google Mr. Earl Super Saver, and you will see a little video about a man whose job was a parking attendant in a parking lot that was like in the financial district, and what that man did on the salary that he made is what we all can do. And so you should write that down, Mr. Earl Super Saver, and Google him at your leisure. But he's an example of all of these things about using the information that he received from knowledgeable people that he then put to use for himself, and created a really decent estate for a regular person. It was way more than $5,000. So again, so Betty, about growing your assets, talk a little bit about safety.
Well, as you mentioned, when we sit down with clients to talk about investments, there are two components that generally come to mind. One is the time horizon, which is how long will they be able to have that money put away before they will need it. And the second component, of course, is the risk tolerance. And it's very interesting. It's generally a questionnaire that we utilize to not so much assess how much one has to invest, but what their emotional quotient is regarding that investment. And you have some people that will have lots and lots of assets, but be very, very risk averse. And you can then have someone who doesn't have as much, but is far less risk averse. But the investment risk analysis generally helps us determine the level of risk that you're willing to take. And one of the things that Bob mentioned earlier was the risk factor. And the higher the yield or the return, the greater the risk is going to be associated with that. So if someone tells you they can consistently earn a high rate of return for you, the next question you need to find out from them, well, how much risk does this involve? So that's how I would answer that, Bob. But there was a question that someone asked in the chat about missing an insurance payment. And what generally happens, if you miss one payment, you're not going to lose your insurance. Let me explain it this way. Insurance is a contract between you and the company. And depending on it depends on how your payments are structured, but you would generally have 30 to 31 days grace period if you missed a payment. And most of the companies, and I can't speak for all of them, obviously I don't represent all companies, but generally they will give you an opportunity. They will make you aware that a payment has been missed. And I'll give you an example. The company I worked for during COVID, they suspended payments until they did it in March. And then in July, when things were at that time appearing to calm down, they allowed, they sent out notifications to let you know that, you had some past due premiums, and they gave you an option to try and work with them to get your payments caught up. And most of the insurance companies, they want you to have that protection. They're not out to end your coverage because you miss a payment.
Well, doesn't that also depend on whether it's term or permanent insurance, Betty? I think if you have permanent insurance and you've built up some cash value in the policy, that you can miss a few payments and still the policy not be canceled, right?
Yes, for the most part, yes. But in terms of, again, it's a contract between yourself and the insurance company, and there are parameters in that contract that say how long, what the terms are if you miss a payment. Even if you have term insurance, they still have guidelines that indicate a specified period of time to get your payments made up.
The term is, with term insurance, it's usually 30 days.
Well, it really depends, Bob. Again, it depends on how the contract is written.
Okay. But from my layperson's perspective, the term insurance is great if, when you have a young family and you want to make sure that, if something happens to you, that there will be money to replace your income generating abilities while your children are growing, because you can get the 30-year level term or the 20-year level term when you're young, and the premium is
Very
reasonable.
Yeah.
But when you get to be my age, you can't afford it.
Well, that is very true. And
that's
also, I'm sorry, Bob, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say, even if you have term and you reach a certain age and that term expires, I guess let's step back a half a step and say, how is it that your premiums are determined when you're applying for insurance? And it's based on your health and your age. So if you're a healthy person and you're a younger person, your premiums are going to be less expensive. And the one thing Bob is absolutely correct about is that the younger you are and the healthier you are, the more you'll qualify for. And your income determines a lot about how much you can afford in insurance as well. If you're trying to protect income, they're going to give you multiples. When you're younger, it can be a multiple of maybe 30 times your earnings over your lifetime. And that's something called economic value, or your human life, I should say, economic value. And the older you are, our community, we have a lot of comorbidities. We tend to be hypertensive. We tend to develop diabetes and things like that. The younger we are, when we go and try and get our coverage, the more favorable the plan will be to you from a financial perspective. There's a question someone has here in the chat. It says, why not just pay for your final expenses ahead of time? That's an option that you can do, but I'm not a funeral director. And what I have heard from a couple of sources is that you pay that up front, but if the cost of it has gone up, they will honor the amount that's been paid. But if it's exponentially more, that's money that you're going to have to be able to come up with.
I think that you might be able to get some type of escalator clause in your pre-funeral expenses too, but pre-funeral payment. But I'm not sure about that. I'm not. That's not what I do.
Right. I was going to say that I've only heard that at a presentation. So, and it was from a funeral director. But that's really not what Bob or I have an area of expertise in. So now here's another question, Bob, where someone wants to, they said, I encourage my children to get policies on me if they want to make money off of my death.
Well, yeah, they can do that. They
Yes.
can do that, but it depends on how old the person is that they're getting the policy on.
Right, right.
Because again, because of the person's age and health, the premium can be unaffordable.
Mhm,
So I think a key takeaway about insurance is that it's best to get it when you're young.
mhm.
That's when the premiums are affordable, and you can get more insurance for the money. And particularly today, well, this brings up a whole different a line of conversation here. I I'm in almost the last quarter, right? So
Mhm.
when I was working, the corporate America had a cradle to grave philosophy. And if you worked for a good company, they wanted you to work for them for 30 years and get your watch. And they would give you a pension that was a good pension that you could live off of in
Mhm.
retirement. Today, the script is flipped, and companies, are not doing that anymore. And now they want you, the employee, to manage your own retirement. And unfortunately, that's most people are not prepared to do that. Be,
That is
be,
correct.
because you know you it's enough on your plate to do your job, if you have children, to look after your children, to pay your bills, and to try to get through the day and through the week and through the month and through the year. But the truth of the matter is that if the good Lord smiles on you, and you have a long and fruitful life, that at some point you're going to stop getting a check from your employer. And at that point, you best have another source of income. And that's what this whole generational wealth concept is all about. All right. And I don't want to scare you, but whatever you are making today, and if you apply the rule of 72 to that also, using inflation, which I'll be generous and say inflation is 2%, so two goes into 72, 36 years, right? So 36 years from now, you're going to need twice as much money as what you need today to live on. All
Mhm.
right. And the question then becomes, well, how can I put away not just 1 year's salary, but hey, I want to stop working when I'm 65, and I want to live to be 85. So how can I do that? And that is that thought process is overwhelming for most people. And that is why you would talk to a financial professional, because you how can I say this? It, it, Most of us can't see how to get there from here, but I can assure you that it is possible. And I will again direct you to that YouTube video of Mr. Earl's Super Saver, because what he did, with the money that he made, we all can do with the money that we are making. And it requires sacrifice and consistency, right? You
Bob,
have
I just want to jump in really quick because everyone is absolutely loving the information in this presentation. Just a heads up, you have 13 minutes left, and we have some questions in the Q&A for you as well. So just want to direct you to those, and
okay.
Let's keep those going. And you have about 12 minutes, and this is incredible. Thank you.
Okay. Well, where are the questions? Why don't you just? Okay. Maybe
Let me go back to the top, Bob. There's several here. Let's see.
Yeah, so one is, do I need additional life insurance if it's a part of my benefits package at my job?
That's a great question, and I'm glad someone asked that, because the insurance coverage that you have through your job is group coverage. It's generally term coverage, and for the most part, it's not portable. If it does, and portable meaning, can you take it to your next company? And most of the time you cannot. So it is always advisable, I would say, to have your own individual insurance coverage. And because again, it's the contract. An insurance policy is a contract between you and the insurance company. And what you get as an individual will generally be very different than what's available through your job. You may have a policy through your job that will give you 1, 2, 3, a multiple of your income, but there are limitations to it, I think is the best way to say that. So it's always better to have your own coverage, whether it's term or permanent. The key is to have the insurance so that in the event of a premature death, your family can maintain the lifestyle. What you're doing with insurance, whether it's life insurance or disability insurance, you're protecting the income. And I would say that having disability insurance is just as important as having life, and vice versa. Those are very, very important foundational pieces of your wealth building.
Yeah, and again, you know, with the younger generation today, what they say is that you're going to have 5 to, I don't know, 7 jobs or something during your lifetime, and most working people have their health insurance and, you know, their group life insurance with the employer, and each time that you move, right, you know, well, whatever the group life insurance was that you had goes away unless you get it again with the new employer. But if you have a retirement savings plan, you know, 401k or 403b with an employer, and you get vested, because some of them have vesting requirements, like you need to be there 3 years to get the company match, things of that nature. But when you leave, you can take your 401k plan with you. You can roll it over to, if the new employer has one, and if the new employer does not have one, you can either leave it with the employer that you are at, which, right, that's not necessarily advisable, and
No.
Or you can roll it over into an IRA, a rollover IRA. And tell them what the importance of not taking the money, Betty, not having it payable to you if you're going to roll it over.
It's a tax consequence. So if you have the monies paid directly to you, that's going to create a taxable event for you. And so the best thing to do is to have the monies rolled over, as Bob said, either into an IRA and work with a financial professional to do that, or roll it over to your new employer. I don't want to say never, because never is such a definitive word, but for the most part, leaving your 401k with the previous employer, while it might earn money for you and it might have been doing well, when you leave that company, you don't really have access to how that gets invested, or you don't necessarily have access to the firm that they utilize, or if they provide you with the financial advisor. So the best thing to do is to roll that money over again into a tax-free, not tax-free, but a tax-deferred account that's established as an IRA, or it just really depends. But you do want to roll it over, and you don't want it to come directly to you. You want it to be for the benefit of, you'll get a check that will say FBO, and it'll be your name, but it's going to be going directly to the new company that the money is being invested with.
You know, so I guess, you know, if they're if you take away anything from this presentation, I would like you to take away a couple of things, right? One is that, you know, do not allow this $5,000 net worth figure to apply to you. All right. You can certainly make sure that that does not happen. All right. And then the other thing is that everybody needs to have an estate plan, regardless of what the size of your estate is, because it's more than just what happens to whatever you own, i.e. the generational wealth. It's also about, you know, what happens to you in the event that you're not able to make decisions for yourself, what happens to minor children in the event that you pass and you know, they are left to fend for themselves. You don't want that to happen, you know, and what happens in the event that you cannot make any type of decisions for yourself. You know, so it's very important, you know, we as a people have a tendency not to want to talk about estate planning because we think that if we do, we're going to die. You know, it's just, I just can't explain it. You know, it makes no sense to me, but well, folks don't like to talk about it. And then they also don't like to tell you what they have, and which leads to the problem that I was pointing out with the different ways that property can be titled, and people think that they're leaving it in the will, but because it was titled with rights of survivorship, it goes to a different person, and you know, and after death, you know, you don't know what happened, but the parties that are left behind you are having a hissy fit because, well, she told me or he told me that this was going to happen, and no, you got that. You're supposed to get that to me, and no, I don't have to do that because the law says so.
So and I just want to jump in really quickly. Bob, would the communications committee be able to get, we want to, like everything you're saying we should have and the things that we should be doing, could we get like a checklist from your law firm that we can then put on our website and send to the membership? That would be very helpful. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, you have 2 more questions in the chat. We have 5 minutes left. So if you can't get to both, could you definitely please address these in the chat? But one question is, anyone listed as a power of attorney, should they be given access to the will for the purpose of clarity as to what their power of attorney specific responsibility will be? Also, if liquidation is necessary, from where will the resource be founded prior to will probate?
Okay. Well, the first question, the power of attorney ceases to be in existence upon the death of the individual who made the power of attorney. It's only good while that person is alive. Okay, that's the first thing. So when somebody dies and a person has a durable power of attorney, their responsibilities stop the minute that the person dies. Right, you know, and so if they have the checkbook, if they were writing checks and all that kind of stuff, the minute that the person dies, they're done. And then, unless they were also named as the executor or the executrix in the will. At that point, and you know, let's say that the person who had the power of attorney is also named as the executrix of the will. All right. So then the day that the person dies, that person can no longer write checks out of that checkbook or anything. What they now have to do is they have to take the will, they have to go to the surrogate's office and probate the will. What probating the will means is that, look, I have a valid self-approving will, and by the way, a self-approving will is a will that has been signed by the testator in the presence of 2 witnesses and the notary. That's a self-proving will. And if you have a self-proving will, all the all the executor has to do is to take the will to the surrogate's office and apply for letters testamentary. They get the letters testamentary, which now allows that person who was the power of attorney, assuming that the power of attorney was also named as the executor in the will. So now they have letters testamentary, which says, I am authorized to handle the estate of Jane, who now is deceased. And so they can take those letters testamentary. And the first thing they have to do is to get an estate checking account. Can't use Jane's account anymore because she's dead. So then they have to get an estate checking account, you have to get a tax ID number from the Internal Revenue Service to do that. And then you gather all of the assets. So everything, if there was a 401k, well, if there's a 401k and it had beneficiaries identified, well, that money will go to those beneficiaries, and there are particular rules associated with inherited IRAs, which Betty might know more than me, but I'm not going to go into that at all. And all of the bills, right? All of the bills, the medical bills and regular bills at the time of the decedent's death, the executor is responsible for gathering all of those and paying the bills, assuming that there are assets available to do that. But so the first thing that happens is that you get letters testamentary, you gather the assets, you gather the debts, and then you have to pay off the debts from the assets before you can distribute anything to the heirs. Did that answer the question? I hope.
And I hope so too. I mean, that was a thorough answer, and we appreciate that, Bob. And just a quick heads up, our next presentation will be our Armed Forces and Veterans Affairs presentation that will start at 2:30. So what I want to do, because there's a lot of activity, and this is important. This is literally what impacts the racial wealth gap. So
yes.
We would definitely like to. We're going to forego what we what we do in between presentation. Let's take this right to 2:30. There's one more question in here because we want people to be fully informed. We want to stop going the routes that we've been going to have a better future. The question we have here is, I am a 26-year-old. What options do I have to invest my money if I only want very low risk vehicles? How much is too much money to keep in a bank for savings? Religiously, I cannot buy life insurance.
Okay, I will take that question, and thanks to the person that asked it. At age 26, you're young, so you have a pretty significant time horizon, and clearly you understand your risk tolerance because you've said, you want low risk vehicles. And so from the perspective of low risk vehicles, you can invest in things where you'll have pooled assets, such as mutual funds, so that the risk is not solely yours. It's divided up amongst a pool of individuals. With regards to the question about how much should you have in the bank, from an emergency savings perspective, we used to say 3 months. In light of today's environment, it's 6 to 9 months of emergency funds. And that's, basically what you would want to keep in the bank, again, because of the liquidity of it. And secondly, the banks don't pay a great deal in interest. And it's the same with some of the other vehicles. But if you are 26 years of age and you start saving now and put away, say, 15 to 20% of your income, and can do that consistently, and work with an advisor who will, do an in-depth analysis of where you are and where you want to get to. And there are software tools that you can utilize yourself, but it's better to work with someone who has access to various vehicles for your benefit.
Okay, and we have about 2 minutes. And again, I'm very serious about that. We definitely would love a checklist from your law firm that we can also, distribute and also get this information out. And again, we have 2 minutes left. Is there any other gems you want to drop with our constituents? We definitely want people to be a marching order, something that they can do immediately following your presentation.
Well, I will take 1 minute of that time, Bob. And what I would just like to say to everyone is understand financial literacy. Education is the key for us to get ahead. Be a good saver, invest in products that will help, or not so much products, but in vehicles that will help you to accumulate the wealth and then protect that wealth in a way that it will provide you with a legacy to leave your family. Because leaving a legacy is an act of love. And sometimes we don't do that in our community. We say, I had to get my own, so let them get their own. But that's really not the way we want to encourage people to pass wealth on and to take care of the next generation behind them.
All I would say in adding to that is if you don't have one, make a budget and identify what your discretionary income is. Mm-hmm. And that's what you then can take to a person like Betty and say, this is my discretionary income. I want to put this to work for me. Let's talk about how to do that.
Bob, one of the things we do when we work, one of the first things we do is the cash flow analysis and the budget. And so when you're working with a financial professional, they'll make sure those things get done. And you'll be amazed at the money that just leaks off your balance sheet because you're just not really being attentive to where your money is being spent.
Well, we would absolutely like to thank this generational wealth, and I forgot the term, Bob, that you said was a better term. I'm sorry, I forgot it. But the title,
net worth.
Yeah, net worth, aka net worth presentation. We really appreciate the information that you shared, and we've already gotten comments in the chat from people who would also like to have that checklist so that we can get that out. So just a little homework for you, Bob, as we do our homework, making sure we're on top of things. Thank you, Betty, as well. We really appreciate the insight that you guys shared. And also thank again, Vanessa Brown, Morris County NAACP branch, who made this referral. So with that, we're going to turn it back into the hands of our Madam Chair, Crystal Charlie Sibley, as we begin to start our Armed Forces and Veterans Affairs presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity.